No, no, that's bigger. That's all the pictures. She didn't. I had 40. She didn't print all 40. Okay. Wait. Okay. And do one more. I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do, I'm like a Brian. Okay. Thank you. Oh yes, yes. When you go through. Now I could go. She's going to introduce me, so I don't know if you want to go back to your seat.
Sorry, my camera's not big enough.
No.
All right.
One of my little brother's elders.
You want me to get the groups quiet?
Hey guys. Hey. Hello. Hi.
I'm not going to block it much longer.
Hey guys. Oh, it's on.
No. I'm going
It's
to sit
on.
down.
It's just quieter in the front because you can already hear. Sorry. You'll be all right. Hey guys. Hey, how are we? Hi everyone. Hello internet viewers. Hello physical viewers. It's so nice to have you guys all here. Before we get started, please go ahead and put your phone on silent for me. Just take 2 seconds. We don't want to derail Giovina's train of thought.
That's easy to do.
On my own.
I'm like, oh, it's sparkling.
Now, I see a lot of familiar faces here tonight, but is anyone, this is your first time attending a Chicago for Chicagoans event? Oh, welcome! Hi! We're very nice.
We got some virgins.
Yeah, there's a Venn diagram. Our speaker tonight, Giovina, runs like 15 meetup groups. There's a Venn diagram of the people that Giovina knows in Chicago, and then the other side of the Venn diagram is people I know in Chicago, and it's not a Venn diagram, it's a circle.
Yeah, the intersect, yes.
So if you know Giovina, you're a friend of mine as well. Thank you guys so much for being here. The weather couldn't be nicer, so you could be anywhere on a patio right now, and instead you're in a basement speakeasy. So thank you. Thanks for coming. For those of you that are new, I'll give you my little spiel. We are Chicago for Chicagoans. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We conduct all of our programming on a pay-what-you-can basis to ensure that our programming remains accessible and affordable to all Chicagoans. So if you have a little bit of scratch tonight and you really enjoy what you're watching, please give us money. We love it. We take many kinds of money. We take cash. We take Venmo. We take PayPal. I don't like taking PayPal, but I do. If you have any form of money, we'll take it. In fact, we also have a banger resale situation with donated kidneys. So we'll take those. Just kidding. Firstborn children getting too expensive. You can keep those. Stocks, bonds, wills. But in all seriousness, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Like I said, we are entirely volunteer. My name is Patty. I'm the executive director. I founded this organization back in 2016. It's grown quite a bit since then. I still volunteer my time to run the organization. We also have a number of other fantastic volunteers that routinely contribute their time and talents to us. So make sure that you say thank you to the lovely girls at the door today, our door wenches, Stephanie and Lisa tonight. You can give them your money. Yeah. And of course, we're very lucky to be hosted at Room 13 and served delicious cocktails by Oscar. So make sure you tip your bartender too. But yeah, so this lecture series, we do a lecture series every single year, and we always have a theme. This year's theme is all the great ways that Chicago culture and cultural output has really changed the United States, changed the world. I was really hopeful somebody would talk about our film history, and Giovina got it done. She submitted the highlights, man. I was like, yes, filmmaking, amazing. So it's a really important topic in Chicago history. If you don't know that we were the first Hollywood, you're about to learn a lot more about it. We're very excited to have Giovina. Not only is she an incredible community organizer, an amazing historian, and gives a lot of time to us, she is also a lifelong Chicago resident, a Portage Park resident. She leads our Portage Park tours, our Old Irving Park tours, and she's got the best pronunciation of Narragansett I've ever heard.
Narragansett.
And so that's how you know that she's legit, and she's probably the best person to hear this topic from. So without further ado, give it up for Giovina.
Get it, G.
Okay. Bear with me a second here. Okay. Oh, they like the bozos. I'm gonna press. Well, this one is been taped up, so I gotta preface it as I was when I was a kid a bozo fanatic, and this Bozo had a lot of love, and I have many pictures, if you'll see at the end of my packet, of me with Bozo. My Bozo doll, 2 of them, and everything like that. So I loved Bozo. So, but anyways, let me get started. As she said, my name is Giovina Romandine, and I'm a lifelong Chicago resident. I grew up originally on the west side, and then I moved to, that was the North Austin neighborhood, and I moved to Portage Park about 38 years ago. I'm going to age myself, in 1986. So I know a lot of history on the northwest side. But besides doing these tours, everything, I have a full-time job. I work in the publishing industry, making children's books. But as she said, I run several social groups. I run stuff on Meetup, 1001 Things to See in Chicago Before You Die, Exploring Chicago with Friends, Windy City Wine. So I keep busy. I like to do tours. Patty's been asking me. I've been doing tours for them now for about 2 years. She asked me 5 years prior to that, and she finally got me. So, and my quote is, I say, to be a tourist in your own city, and always stay curious and just get out and walk, and you'll find stuff that you can't see in the car. So. Now, we're covering a couple topics tonight. I unfortunately had to take out soap operas because I ran out of time. So, so we're going to do definitely Chicago filmmaking in its early heyday and then to current status. And then, of course, Chicago children's TV in its glory days that went from like 1949 through the 70s. So, and as Patty mentioned, and it's a quote, and it's in several books. Before there was Hollywood, there was Chicago. And so to preface this with Edison, Thomas Edison, American inventor, and his assistant William Dickinson, they unveiled a new type of recording camera called I probably pronounce it wrong, kintograph. Originally, they started working on it about 1890. They were supposed to premiere it at the Chicago World's Fair. Fortunately, they were not able to premiere at the Chicago World's Fair because William Dixon, if you guys don't know, Edison was a taskmaster, worked his people basically death, and Dickinson had pretty much a nervous breakdown and could not have everything ready. So it premiered later, probably like 1894. Edison will try to say, and many times he said that it premiered at the World's Fair, and his did not. But his kintograph, bear with me here, was this kintograph. It took a series of photographs of people and objects in motion. So yeah, if you want to look at pick number 1, and their ingenious design took a series of photographs of people and objects in motion. And at that time, it was the fastest camera of its kind. It would take approximately 40 frames per second. And that was a big deal back then, not compared to now. And it was on a reel up to 15 meters long. These things were big, And then they also designed a kintoscope, which means displaying the process film, which ran through imagery through a lamp and a magnifying lens inside a wooden cabinet. And that's what that is, the kintoscope. And they could watch it basically through a peephole. So back then it was just one person at a time. And they unveiled it to the wider public, like I said, about 1894. He wasn't the only one. There was a couple other people about the same time. There was Auguste and Louis Lumière. In 1895, they designed it even better or more audience accessible device they called the cinemagraph, and I don't do French very well, so I probably they're on. And that was a multi-image projector that could display 16 frames per second. And they made a series of film like documenting like a baby eating and a group of workers leaving the factory, and that amazed audiences because they weren't used to this, so it was very, very simple. But they weren't as patent hungry as Edison was, and he was very much, Edison was very litigious, and so he had a lot of patents. And he had a patent on his projectors and was trying to use it, especially if you were out in the East Coast. And what they instilled was, and I'm just kind of giving a little preface before we go into the Chicago stuff, it was called the Motion Picture Patents Company, or MPPC for short. or also known as the Edison's Trust. And that was founded in December of 1908. And it was effectively terminated in 1915 by the after the loss of federal, by the antitrust with the Supreme Court. But basically, they kind of started like a cartel of the of the guys that the movie houses or the movie studios at the time. So it was Edison, Biograph, Vitagraph, S&A, Selig, Lubin, Kalem, Starfield Paris, and American Path. And they had a leading film distributor and the biggest supplier of raw film stock, which was Eastman Kodak. And they basically, if you wanted to film anything, you had to use their stuff. And if you didn't, they were suing you all over the place. It was very hard for the independent filmmakers. So the MPPC ended their domination, let's see, on foreign and U.S. screens in about 1915 when they lost, like I said, the 1915 Supreme Court case. Let's see here. Yes, he owned so many pensions, but he would go after just about everybody. So it was really hard for people, especially working on the East Coast. And that's kind of why some people said this first came to Chicago, and then they started going out west because they were trying to get further and further away from Edison and his litigious nature. It, like I said, it almost came suffocating. So every turn that the industry made, there was a lawsuit. There was nobody could do any innovation because he was suing for everything. And it was basically a monopoly, and they called it like a cartel. So when people out west felt that and that's where things started to go out west, is they felt the judges were a little more, less tied up with Edison and a little more favorable to the independents. Even if they sided with Edison, they just didn't really enforce it. So it was just a little more lax. Now, let me just explain the ruling that changed everything in 1915. It was the United States versus the Motion Picture Patent Company. A patent, or Pantene, I'm sorry, a Pantene may simply enforce the right to exclude infringement, but he or she must not use his patent as a weapon to disable rival contestants. Because he was just like choking everybody. It's like, you're not, you can sue people, but you can't use this as a rival. So, and that ruling basically made Hollywood become what it is now. Today, it was first because Chicago did movies, but we had other stuff going on. We had other industry. So we were never going to be able to hold it. Whereas Hollywood was just this dusty little town, and it just basically, they built everything around the movie industry out there. It was ripe to be developed. So that's kind of when we lost everybody, and the weather. I mean, we have crappy weather in Chicago and the weather. So they say Edison to his dismay, he is probably the biggest influence of creating Hollywood. Without his cutthroat tactics, they probably would have stood in West Orange, New Jersey, where he started. But I'm going to now talk about the two studios that kind of kicked off stuff for us in Chicago, which would be Selig Polyscope, and S&A. And we were big, they for about 10 years. We weren't very much doing movies for very long, but we did a lot because they did a lot of movies back then. So then I'm going to start talking about Selig Polyscope Company. And they were founded in 1896 by William Selig in Chicago. And the original general sales offices were located at 47 East Randolph Street, or 45 to 49 East Randolph Street. And then their laboratory and works were located at 3900 Claremont. If you look at picture number 3, you'll see, and picture number 4, I have them labeled if you got the packets. I don't know if you're looking at line or so, but it'll show some pictures of how the studio looked back in the day. In the building 3900 Claremont, it still exists to this day. It is a loft. So, yeah, if you guys got the smaller packets, you're not going to have numbered, but you can look online. Yeah. So it's still there? The building is still there, not the whole. That it was blocks long. So, what we took. I'm sorry. Let's wait till questions till after I finish the talk. So, because otherwise this will go on very long. So, anyways, so their studios, if they're not on Claremont, which is there's only a apartment building or condo lofts, went from Irving Park to Western to Byron and Claremont Street. It was blocks long. It was huge. There was nothing out there at that time that was like farmland. So, the first Selig production that they could attribute was called The Tramp and the Dog. It is now lost. A lot of the Selig films, a lot of S&A films are lost. They reused a lot of materials. They didn't know how to store stuff. They didn't think posterity would want to see this, so they, it was made on stuff that basically disintegrates with time. But it was called The Tramp and the Dog, and it was made either 1896 or 1899. Counts may vary, but it was about a tramp who stole some pies and then was chased by a dog. That's about it. It was under 2 minutes long, so, but it marked the beginning of film production. But these people didn't see anything motion pictures, anything moving back then, so they were just amazed by it. So, but Selig, he could a couple things, he at first really was he made a camera called the Selig Standard camera, which was a modified version of the Lumiere's cinematograph. The cinematograph. So, and it's different from Edison's camera. So he kind of got around some of Edison's lawsuits by using this different camera. And then, and he would sell that camera, and as another item he'd sell in Sears catalog. And then he started originally turning his attention to making what they call Luminaire-like actualities, which is basically a fancier name, or what they used to call documentaries. They wanted to shoot some things about some wars going on, stuff the government wouldn't let them, so they did like reenactments, basically is what these actualities are. And so they would make these little films to make it look, and people didn't know better, and they would make it look like if they were doing the Spanish-American War, or they were in Cuba, they were here, and the people thought they were seeing live footage, So we've had fake news for a long time. And, let's see here. And then if you look at like picture number 6, it shows how big his studio is. So the apartment building that's left, they used to have a glass roof because they needed to have light come in. That's long gone since they built the apartment building, but it shows kind of how big the studio was. And then they're noted for establishing the first permanent movie studio in Southern California. It's in the historic Annandale district of Los Angeles, which is now Echo Park. They produced a lot of early commercial moving pictures. They did a lot of their first films were the beginning of the stars of the silent era would be Tom Mix, Harold Lloyd, Colleen Moore, which if you've ever been to the Museum of Science Industry and saw her fairy castle, that's the same Colleen Moore, and Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, to name a few. In California, he also had what they called the Selig Zoo, because he did a lot of westerns and documentaries, so he always had a lot of animals. So he had his own little zoo. And it ended up at the end when the studio collapsed, all he had was this little failing zoo, which he loaned out the animals to different studios. And that's, let's see, and then it looks like the film production ended with that company. They stopped doing films about 1918. Now, William Selig is a native Chicagoan, and he traveled across the country as a magician or fake medium. So basically, he went around the traveling circus. He was a con man, which is what a lot of people do. And he called himself a colonel, even though he was not ever in the army. It just they said it was affiliated with the circus, and hence he comes to her. But when he was on the road, he encountered Edison's kinetoscope in Dallas, and that sparked his ambition of doing movies. And then when his patent, like I said, got in the way, he went around and made his own little camera through similar to the Lumiere, so he could not be sued. Let's see. He liked using his own own equipment that he would sell, like I said, through Sears and Montgomery Ward's and a couple different catalogs. Um, by 1909, he was making a lot of short features in Chicago, and then simultaneously also in Annandale, Los Angeles, because the weather was better. They would do more westerns out there. They also distributed a lot of stock footage to other studios, because there's a lot of studios at that time popping up all over with this new medium. In 1910, he did a wholly filmed or new filmed a version of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. If you remember, Frank Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz, originally from Chicago. So he did one of the first productions. So they had, and that's picture 6B. You'll look at it. That's one of the first pictures. And they have, you could go online on YouTube and see a little, like 45-second clip of the movie. But they were mostly known for their wild animal shorts and historical subjects, and then, of course, the early westerns. If you look at picture number 5, I kind of went in order, but there's 2 African Americans kissing. That's something Selig filmed. It was called, the name of the movie was called Something Good, Negroes Kiss. It was made in 1898. It's a short silent film. It's a couple kissing and holding hands. It's believed to depict the earliest on-kiss screen involving African Americans, and is known from departing from the prevalent and stereotypical racist presentations at the time. They were 2 minstrel actors, and you'll see it's 2 people kissing. You can't miss it if you're looking at the picture. Actually, here it is. It might have fell out of your packet. There it is. Yes. So anyway, so it wasn't any racist characters. It was just, they first found like 20 seconds. The film was lost until they rediscovered it in 2017, and it was added to the National Film Registry in 2018. And then they found, in 2021 in Norway, they found a larger footage, about 49 seconds. And so they have that. You could go on YouTube and you can catch it if you type in the name of the movie, which is called Something Good, Negroes Kiss. You'll be able to see it, and it's very lovely, and it's a very nice, sweet picture at a time when they had a lot of racist depictions. So it was very nice. And then, as I mentioned before, they did The Wizard of Oz in 1910. So they was in the one that Selig filmed. Otis Turner was the director, and Frances Boggs, and that starred Romola Remus as Dorothy, Joseph Shroud as the Cowardly Lion, Frank Burns as the Scarecrow, and if you know, Frank Burns starred in the movie, so we repeat, and George Wilson as the Tin Man. Prior to this release of the film version, in 1908, Selig was involved in a production of the Fairy Log and radio plays, and that was a touring multimedia attempt to bring L. Frank Baum's book to the wider public. They played the full houses, but it was a financial disaster for Baum. So they tried. It wasn't until they made the one in the 30s that it became a financial success and it became color. But they tried. So if you could go online, it's cute to look at. It's, in black and white. It's very different from the Technicolor spectacle that we know. And a partial list of their films, because they did a lot of them, but they'd like the Tramp of the Dog, Soldier's Play, Something Good, Chicago Police Parade, Dewey Parade, Trip Around the Union Loop, View of State Street, which I think is just a video of people walking down State Street. That was a big movie. Tracked by Bloodhounds, which or called A Lynching by Cripple Creek, Humpty Dumpty. Then they had one called The Tramp Dog. So I'm thinking, I don't know if that's a remake or sequel to the Tramp of the Dog. The Count of Monte Cristo, to name a few. They did in, let's see, and a lot of these have not survived. A few have. City of Purple Dreams, Little Orphan Annie. They had a couple good major important stars at the time. Like I mentioned, Fatty Arbuckle. He was a silent film actor. He's a director and screenwriter. And he started at Sealy Polyscope and eventually made his way over to Keystone Studios. And he did work with Charlie Chaplin, Monty Banks. Well, actually, I should say he mentored, I should say worked. He mentored Charlie Chaplin, Monty Banks, and Bob Hope. And brought vaudeville star Buster Keaton into the movie business. So he was very influential. He was one of the most popular silent films of the 1910s, and at the time, the highest paid actor in Hollywood. Signing a contract in 1920 with Paramount for $1 million a year, which would be the equivalent of $14.6 million in 2022. But he had a lot of scandal. He had 3 widely publicized trials between 1921 to 1922 because he was accused of raping and killing an actress, Virginia Rapp. So, so his legend, he's off overlooked because of the scandal. And then one of their first stars, who ended up then becoming one of his competitors, Bronco Billy Anderson. So Bronco Billy was the stage name for Gilbert Macro Anderson. He was America's first cowboy movie star. And so, people like John Wayne and Gary Cooper, Roy Rogers attribute, Bronco Billy's their influence. And then what happened is, and so he worked a lot behind the scenes. He did a lot of directing, and he developed production techniques still in use today. In 1907, he moved to Chicago to produce films. He was originally from Arkansas. There he developed the idea the public would pay to see good Western movies. And in the era of cowboy films, he produced films in Colorado and California because he thought the weather was more conducive, and he said this is much more better for the cowboy movie. So he would go out there a lot to do that. But he created, and then we'll talk about next, is he split off with George Spohr to create S&A Studios. But he did start originally at Seelig. But he developed some of the techniques he devised was the long shot, the medium shot, the close. Back then they would just take a still, and they didn't have all these techniques that they have now. And he was one of the pioneers of that. And then, like I said, he kind of left Seelig because he wanted to go off in his own direction and do his own thing, and that's when they created S&A Studios in 1907. They, as I mentioned several times, they had a California studio. It was mild, dry. They could do a lot of their westerns that they liked. It was far away from Edison and all his lawsuits. And it was kind of just a dusty cow town. But Seelig set up a studio in, like I said, mentioned before, Edendale. And Francis Boggs kind of initially ran it. They also had the Seelig Zoo. And then, unfortunately, this studio started to decline in the mid-19 so like 1915, because of all the legal troubles with Edison, lawsuits, everything moving out west. Even though he created Alliance, it just was too much, and there. Sorry, I got a lot of crap here. But the one of the last 2 Seeligs film made was called Pioneer Days, and it was based on the Battle of Fort Dearborn, and it was filmed in Wilmette. Wilmette. So, in the 1940s, Seelig made a large donation of business records to the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Science Library. And he donated his papers, correspondence, scripts, stills from 500 films that would have otherwise been lost, because they guessed about only 225 of the 3,500 films that they made between 1896 and 1938 have survived to present day. Now, if you could go find Seelig Polyscope now online. They kind of reactivated. It's like an archive now. They're trying to go around and find collectors that maybe have some old films and restore them. So, but they said since there was an 85-year gap from when they kind of finished in the 20s till when they reactivated in 2008, there's lots lost. So they're trying now to slowly build up, but they've been finding, like they found that one movie from 1898, the Kiss, that was lost. It was one guy had it, and then somebody else in Norway had it. So you never know what people have in their dusty attics and in barns. Now on to SNA Studios, which is kind of more well known. I think kind of the brighter of the two, I guess you would say. But SNA Studios was a Chicago, also pioneer filming established by George K. Spoor and Bronco Billy, I understand. And basically it was originally named Peerless Film Manufacturing, and they changed it to SNA, which basically is the phonetic spelling of their initials, S and A. That's how they came about. They became, at the time, one of the largest film companies in those early 1900s. Now, they had a lot of stars. They had Francis Bushman, Beverly Bain, Gloria Swanson, Charlie Chaplin, Max Linder. Now, if you look at like pick number 7, 8, 9, 10, you'll see the studio. Look, that studios, some of it's still here today. You can't get into a lot of it because that's St. Augustine's College. But you can see where it was. It's in the Uptown area off Argyle Street. You see the two Indian heads. That's kind of was their logo. They were originally located at 500 North Wells Street, which would be like 1360 North Wells now because of street renumbering. Their first film was called An Office Skate, or The Hobo on Rollers. So it's basically just a guy roller skating and falling over himself. So that was in July of 1907, and that was starring Ben Turpin, and he was a studio janitor. Back then they used to just pull everybody into it, and he, come on, we'll do a movie. They moved in 1908 to 1333 to 1345 West Argyle Street, and you could, like I said, you could still see a lot of the logos in the building. One of the owners of the studio was also an actor, Bronco Billy. So not only did he direct and produce, and he was running production, then he would do all those Bronco Billy westerns. So he had a couple hats he was wearing, and they had Charlie Chaplin. They got in late 1914, went into 1915. People talk, and if you go in uptown real estate, they'll tell you Charlie Chaplin lived here, stayed here, bought here. He was only in Chicago for 2 months. He was only in Chicago he made one movie in Chicago. So he's not, it's kind of like Capone slept here or Lincoln slept here. They're just people trying to sell you something. He didn't stay very long. He made one movie called His New Job. He didn't like the weather, but also it was just, he didn't like how SNA did business. He only lasted with them about a year. It was a combination. It was just the weather. So, but he ended up doing a bunch of more movies with SNA, but out in California. So if they tell you that he lived here, there, it's not, he was only here 2 months. So, let's see. Now, George Spoor, one of the owners, he had co-managed the Phoenix Opera House in Waukegan. He did that for about 1895 to 1899. And he was in business with an inventor called Edward Emmett. And Edward Emmett was known for inventing some things in the picture industry. So between him and then Bronco Billy, they decided to do more elaborate productions compared to what we do nowadays. They're basic, but definitely more elaborate. But Spoor was like he was also an inventor. He wanted to create new things, and he wanted to. He was intrigued by Edison's kinetoscope, and because he claims he saw it at the World Exposition, but he didn't see it there. He must have saw it somewhere else. But he created a thing called the magnoscope, which allowed films to be projected onto flat surfaces. And they installed, operated, and rented the magnoscope in many theaters around Chicago. Now, this would quite many legal battles between SNA and Edison, because he seems to always be popping his head into this business. but anyways, Bronco Billy probably is best known for his one movie, well, many movies, but the one movie he's most well known for is The Great Train Robbery, and everyone knows that, with the and then, like I said, he kind of pushed also SNA to like, okay, we need to put some studios out in California because this is better for westerns. So he. They are in, SNA was, I think, headed Niles, California is where their studios ended up being. But a list of some of SNA's films was A Christmas Carol in 1908, The James Boys of Missouri, which is considered to be the first biopic about American outlaws like Jesse and Frank James. They did the first pie-in-the-face gag on screen with Ben Turbin and Mr. Flip. Of course, when I mentioned the new job with Charlie Chaplin. In 1916, they released the first American Sherlock Holmes film. The American Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, sorry. They did a lot of animated comedies. They did a small boy, Dreamy Dud, and his dog Wag. They were favorite. They had Dreamy Dud, D-U-D, Dud, yeah, and his dog Wag. In the early 1900s, they were my favorite cartoon characters for theater audience. So, as I mentioned, they had a lot of important stars that went on to greater and better things. It started Gloria Swanson. I did not realize until I did my research that she, the famous, my close-up Mr. DeMille, that she did later on in life. But anyway, she was born in Chicago. She moved around with her family, but she was raised in a military family, and they moved from base to base. But then they moved back to Chicago, and her fascination, or infatuation, I should say, with SNA Studios was she liked this actor, Francis Bushman. He was like the good-looking leading man at the time. And so she talked her aunt into taking her to the SNA studio, and to check him out. Now, they say that she was offered a brief walk-on role, and that began her career in the movies. And then she didn't stay at SNA very long. She was swooned out to California, over to Keystone Studios, and then she did a lot of comedy shorts with Bobby Vernon. And then, of course, she was married very young. She married him in Chicago, was William Beery, and I want to get into that because he wasn't a very good husband. They divorced, so, but she, let's see, I'm sorry. Well, that's real bad. Unless she just moved out, and then she did a lot of stuff out in California, so she really didn't do much with SNA, but you get her associated a lot with SNA because she got her start. Now, Francis Bushman, the one that got Gloria to the studio, mentioned he was an American film actor and director. He was considered the matinee idol. He started in 1911, and he did several films called His Friend's Wife. He gained a large female following. Basically, you could say Gloria Swanson was a groupie of his, and so. And he was definitely a big star in the early 1910s and early 1920s. He was originally a stage actor, so a lot of stars back then, they were vaudeville actors or stage actors and then broke into the movies. He had what they say is a very muscular, sculpted frame, and he appeared in nearly 200 featured films. He more than, it was 175 before 1921, but they used to crank out, if you look at the movie list, they would crank out a movie every 2 weeks, so they were... and then, of course, there was Charlie Chaplin, and he came from, they kind of stole him or lured him from Keystone. He was kind of looking for some more money, and Keystone couldn't afford to pay him anymore. So he asked for $1,250 a week and a $10,000 bonus. Now, this is in 1914, so, do today's math, he's asking. And they agreed to it. SNA agreed to it. He was surprised, but they did. So, but I think it was Anderson that agreed to it and not Spohr, because Spohr claimed to have never heard of Chaplin, which that in sense, because Chaplin was already kind of a well-known star. He goes, what do you mean you don't heard of me? You know, everybody knows me kind of thing. But he did. And he was kind of skirting around paying that 10K bonus. So that was one of the reasons why I didn't stay in Chicago very long, too, because it was some of the money issue. The studio SNA wanted them to use their scripts. They wrote scripts and they handed it to him. He wanted to write his own scripts. And I found, variants of tidbit, Luella Parsons, if you know Luella Parsons that used to do the gossip columnist. She started out at SNA and she ran the scenario department and she ran the scripts and she would hand him scripts and he's like, what do you mean? I write my own scripts. I'm not using your scripts. So, and so he balked about that. He didn't like the weather. So, it was just a lot. It was only 2 months and he went and did California and he was only with SNA not very, very long, maybe about a year, and then he moved on. But they had that one claim to fame and that was a big deal at that time. They had a lot of publicity about Charlie Chaplin coming to Chicago and he was not used to press and he was not used to people trying to sign autographs. And it was a little much for him. So, but SNA made over 2,000 films, and most of them were produced on the West Coast, but in Niles, California. But they did, which they opened that studio in 1913. But by 1916, that studio closed in California. So basically changes the movie industry, stuff with the lawsuits, things didn't work out with Charlie Chaplin. They spent a lot of money. But in a last-ditch effort to stay afloat, they did what you would call now a merger. It was SNA's. They entered with agreement with Vitagraph Studios, Luba Manufacturing, Selig, and they formed a film distribution partnership called VLSE. And they didn't last very long. About the 1920s, Vitagraph was the only one that continued after that, and it was all absorbed by Warner Brothers by 1925. So they quickly dissolved. So like I said, Chicago only had about a good 10 years. So, if you look at pick number like 15 and 16 of SNA Studios, you'll see kind of how it looks now. But the legacy they leave is that Chicago did Hollywood first. But the building was, the guy that took over the building after SNA left, the one in Chicago, his name was Norman Wilding, and he made like industrial films. And he was there much longer than the original SNA. He was there to from when he took over 1920 to 1970. And then they donated a portion of the college to Columbia College for $1. But the offer lapsed without action. So then it was given to a nonprofit television corporation, which sold it. And one tenant was Technicolor. But anyways, right now it's St. Augustine College is there. So unfortunately, you cannot get inside of it. But if you look at picture number 12, you'll see a mural of Charlie Chaplin walking. I believe I don't know if it's the dog or if it's the child. That's painted. That's inside the auditorium. That's called the Charlie Chaplin Auditorium. You can't, unless you go to the college or you ask for a private tour, which it always lets you in. You can't see it. We tried. My group knows. We tried doing a tour, and they don't let you in there very often. So. The building is landmarked, yes, but the college won't let you inside to see that mural. But you can see the outside, but the building is landmarked. Also in Chicago, we were known for making what they called race films. And that was basically on the South Side. The African Americans decided, well, they're going to start their own movie production companies and make films that better predict them in movies. They started about 1915 and went till 1950s, but they were produced for black audiences, featuring black casts. There's approximately 500 race films that were produced. Only fewer than 100 remain. And because they were produced outside of the Hollywood or even the Chicago system, they're largely forgotten by mainstream, but they were very popular in their heyday, and their influence continues to be felt in television and movies today, marketing African-American audiences. And the term race film is sometimes used to describe films of the period aimed for other minority audiences. I'm sorry. So, for instance, the 1926 film Silk Bouquet, also known as The Dragon Horse, starred Asian American actress Anna May Wong, and was marketed for the Chinese American audience. One of the studios that we had in Chicago at the time was called the Foster Photoplay Company. Around 1913, they started over at the Grand Theater at 3110 South State Street. And then there was a lot of other studios in Chicago around the same time. A lot of them lasted a year, 6 months. You know, there was a bunch of them, but the two biggest ones I covered were probably the most widely known. Chicago also had the most well-known Chicago Censorship Board. The Chicago Board of Censors was a committee based in Chicago that was founded in 1907 as the Police Censor Board and operated until 1984. It was the first film censorship board in the United States. The board had great influence over editing and distribution of many films. In Chicago, it enacted the first censorship ordinance, like I said, in 1907. And they were kind of like the police chief of screening films and whether they should permit it on screen. In 1915, the U.S. Supreme Court determined in Mutual Film Corporation versus Industrial Commission of Ohio that motion pictures were purely commerce and not art, and so not uncovered by the First Amendment, because a lot of people saying you're censor me, you're impeded on my First Amendment right, and they're saying no, this is art, this is not covered under. So, but they had two more court cases, one in 1957 and one in 1961. The same thing, they kind of ruled in favor of the censorship board, but by the 60s, they kind of reversed that and went the other way, and so they largely reduced the censorship stuff to ineffectual. And we kind of had a lapse from 1920s I mean, there was stuff still made here from 1920 to 1970, but nowhere near as much. The studios were here that collapsed. The rise of Chicago filmmaking again was attributed probably to the late 70s, early 80s. So Chicago basically remained on the map, even though there was Hollywood. Citizens here remained with a large appetite for motion pictures. We had basically the largest chain of theaters during the studio era from 1919 to 1952. You know, Balboa and Katz chain. You look at all these beautiful old theaters. So we like to watch movies. It was, you know, just they weren't always made here. But Balboa and Katz owned they owned palaces such as the Chicago Theater, the Ford Center, the Performing Arts, the Oriental Theater, Uptown Theater. Let's see, I'm trying to think of a couple others. I can't think of the top. Yeah, I think there's a couple others. But anyways, but movie production again entered in Chicago, definitely in the late 1970s, early 80s, because the state of Illinois became a leader in the money spent on film production. They give a lot of tax incentives. they allude like, come here, film by us, because it got expensive to film in California, and they were looking for their other spots. So, but the notable films of the 80s would be Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Color of Money, Risky Business, Untouchables, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, When Harry Met Sally. You know, yes, the Blues Brothers. They did about Last Night. John Hughes was very influential about 16 Candles. So they furthered more new production with the boom of the passage of the Illinois Bill in 2009, and this bill provides a 30% tax credit on all production costs within the state of Illinois. Instituting that law in 2009, many filmmakers have committed to Chicago for production. So recent films who contribute are like The Transformers, Contagion, Source Code, Batman, Dark Knight, you know, a couple of the new bill benefits Chicago with increased tax revenue from $70 million to 2009 to $100 million in 2010. I don't have recent figures, but it gave us that's a lot of money for us. In 2011, Nick Mercolopoulos, founder of Cinespace Studios, and I probably chopped up his name, I'm sorry, Nick, he started in Toronto, but he launched Cinepace Chicago Film Studios with his nephew, Alex Pisos, who's a Chicago native, and they have this. They collaborated on a production facility, which was the former Ryerson Steel complex, and then they have more than 60 acres in North Lawndale neighborhood, and so that's the largest independent movie studio outside of Los Angeles. And they have around 35 sound stages, a dozen production offices and support spaces, production tenants for offer equipment, casting services, post-production houses, 3D animation, camera and lighting, rental sales. Since its inception, CineSpace has brought in more than $3 billion in related film spending. If you want to be an extra in Chicago, go look. They do a lot of casting calls. So they call themselves the Hollywood of the Midwest. They created about 15,000 jobs. And right now they got about 40 major productions. Besides the movies they did like the Batman movies, Dawn of Justice. But here I'll give you, they do Chicago Fire, Chicago Med, Chicago PD, The Bear, Empire, which is not on anymore, that made to look in New York. Chicago was lucky because you can make Chicago, a lot of parts of Chicago look like any town, and that's why we're a good spot to film. So they do a lot of stuff that's supposed to look like New York, but it's really filmed in Chicago because we're a lot cheaper. If you look at pic number 17, which is the picture of Marina Towers with the car jumping off, that was one of the, that stunt, that was The Hunter, that was with Steve McQueen. That was one of his last movies before he passed away. They filmed that scene with people looking on, trying to get in there in 1979, but they drove the car off the parking garage. So, but then I have a picture of like the Blues Brothers. I have a picture of Paris Bureau Day Off, the Untouchables. If you've ever been in Union Station, they reopened the grand marble staircase where they filmed that scene in Untouchables, where the lady's trying to carry the baby up, and I forget his name, was trying to. Yes, Andy Garcia was trying to shoot the guys that had the accountant and stuff, and that was closed for a while. That was under construction, but a couple of years ago they've reopened it, so you can go see that lovely staircase now, and you'll say, "Oh yeah, I remember that from the from the movie." So there's a lot of recognizable stuff and scenery, but when they in Union Station, yes, Union Station. So, but let me take a little break here because.
And they were filming, and this woman in the 30s dress, and they're walking, but nobody was telling us.
Yeah, you're like, what's going on?
Can you people get out of here? And I'm like, hey, we live here, we're walking.
That we're not used to, yes.
But it was really funny to see them. So.
Yes. Oh, it's no worries. So now that's kind of ends to my stuff about the filmmaking, because we kind of brought to the present day. Chicago's still going strong. There's a bunch of new stuff we filmed. If you live in a Chicago neighborhood, you see signs up that say, "Can't park here from Monday to whatever," because they're filming. So, and I got offered once, a little tidbit. I got offered for The Chi. Was it The Chi or was it Shameless? They wanted to use our house, and I didn't respond to it. I should have. I could have got money in the house. So exactly. So they do. I could have been a star. So, but now I'm going to go into my bus. Yeah, they were scouting the neighborhood, and I thought it was bogus. By the time I asked neighbors, they had already found their houses. So, but anyways, now I'm going to go to what I really wanted to talk about was Chicago. Children's TV in Chicago TV. So as you can see here from my little dead Bozo with the taped up neck because he fell off, and this one, I loved Bozo. I used to take his little hair and stick it up my nose to make myself sneeze. I was weird as a kid, but. And this poor thing, I would cry every time my mother had to throw him in the wash machine because she had to wash him because I threw up on him and everything. So I loved Bozo, but I couldn't understand why Chicago was so rich in children's TV programming until I started doing the little history about it. And basically, there was a period from the late 1940s until the mid-1970s, and was called the Golden Age of local children's programming. While New York and Los Angeles produced a good number of shows, Chicago tackled the field with greater energy and ambition. They had a unique market that they had to develop a lot of their own programming, because when TV first started, network services were not as complete. They couldn't reach as far. They didn't have, they didn't have satellites, everything they do now. So basically, they were kind of the local stations. You're on your own for stuff. And the first successful show in the Chicago area was Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. And so if you look at, you can see some pictures of Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. Like pick 21 and 22. You'll see the puppets. They were on Channel 2 WBBM TV, but at the time it was different call letters. But they were definitely the first success station. And then when they saw the success with Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, other stations followed to do kids programming. But the independent station WGN Channel 9 seemed to offer they cornered the market on children's TV shows. And they weren't a superstation back then. They weren't a superstation until 1978. So, and then in the mid-1950s, they expanded. So that was the VHF channels. In the mid-1950s, they expanded to the UHF band. And that's where you got your channel 26 and your channel 32, which would be like your Fox now. I don't know what 26 is called, but I remember 26. Those old enough to remember. They used WCIU. They used to show a lot of the wrestling. My father used to love. That was like the heyday of wrestling, with Gorgeous George and everything like that, and White Sox games. And then by the 60s, UHF took on adding more kids shows. But in the late 1960s, there was this group of concerned mothers. There was even concerned mothers back then. The action of children's television. Were formed by parents to pressure networks into changing programming policies. A lot of these kids shows were like a live host, showing cartoons, and a lot of the old cartoons from the 30s and 40s were very violent, And so they didn't want the violent content in cartoons and the number of commercials, because it was crazy riddled with commercials. And the biggest blow to children's programming, just why? Because I was wondering, why don't we have local programming now? But the biggest blow happened in January of 1972 when NAB, the National Association of Broadcasting, under pressure from the FCC, ruled that kids show hosts could no longer present sponsor commercials. If you remember, those that are old enough, the guys, Ray Rayner and stuff, they were saying, here is Tide or whatever. They would do their own little commercial. And for local sponsors, that was a cheap way to do a commercial. And then people trusted it because it was, the kids were like, oh, this is somebody I know, and he's trying to sell me Cracker Jacks or something. So, and sponsors always felt having the host of commercials, with the kids and moms being familiar with them, that was good for their business. And so that dried up a big source of revenue for a lot of these kids programming, which was hard on the smaller markets. Chicago being a big national market can withstand it. They had other sponsors, but your little small towns, your Racines and Kenosha's and stuff that maybe had the local car dealership or the supermarket couldn't handle that. And so sponsors dried up, and then the kids shows got shut down, and so that's when a lot of it disappeared. So, and nowadays, network TV basically carries about 3 hours, the bare minimum, in kids programming, which they usually do on Saturday morning or Sunday morning. And it's labeled like educational. That's like an FCC rule. But compared to what we had back in the day, you just were flooded with stuff in the morning. And those of us old enough to remember, we used to come home for school for lunch and used to watch them. And you'd have that, you'd have it after school. So kids
have always been addicted to school.
Yes. And there was a study saying that the kids were going to get, I think there was a term for, because they were sitting cross-legged in front of the TV, but they called it cross-leggedist or something. I forget exactly what it was sitting too much in front of the TV. So it's always been a problem. So, or at least it's been a problem since TV's been invented. So, but I'm going to discuss several shows that I found very interesting that, started in Chicago, and basically some of them got nationwide attention and some did not. But the first one, obviously, which I already mentioned, was Cuckoo Fran and Ollie. And they were early American TV show for kids using puppets. It was created for children, but it was soon found out it was watched by more adults than children. I don't know. That was a little before my time. I'm old, but not that old. So they did not have a script, and they totally ad-libbed. It was broadcast in Chicago from October 13th, 1947, before a lot of people had TVs, in the 40s, to August 30th, 1957. And it was had comedian Fran Allison. She starred interacting with the puppets, Kukla and Ollie, and sometimes other puppets. And the puppeteer was Burr Tillstrom. And after their initial run, they appeared in other productions over the decades, but that was their main thing. Burr Tillstrom was the creator and the only puppeteer on the show. Originally started out as Junior Jamboree, and then they renamed the program as Cuckoo Fran and Ollie, or KFO. Let's see. The puppet cast was Kukla. He was the earnest leader of the troupe. Ollie, or Oliver the Dragon, was the roguish one-toothed dragon. So if you remember that. And he would slam his flat chin on the stage in frustration. He would do this, or roll back his, head if it was endearing. Madame Oglepus, a retired opera diva. Beulah the Witch, a brash madcap witch. Fletcher Rabbit, the troupe's mailman. And resident fuss budget. I guess they had Karens back then too. Rest of us should keep in with the shows on Strays Youth. They did a lot of puns, and they also worked. Let's see, they worked at the Eggplant, and Cecil Bill was the union stagehand, and he spoke an unintelligible Tui talk. They had Colonel Cracky, a Southern gentleman, Dolores Dragon, Ollie's younger cousin, and a number of others. And their humor relied on building a relationship between these characters and the audience over time. And the humor is quite tame compared to today's standards. But there was, a few laugh out loud jokes. And they evoked loyalty. And people really believed in the characters from the regular viewers. Fans became so attached to the show that when they were cut back to 15 minutes from their original 30 minutes in 1951, they got letters of outrage aboard to NBC, and the poor Bob and Ray show that filed, got all kinds of hate mail for, you're taking my Cuckoo Fran and Ollie away. But from August 1952 to 1954, KFO ran a weekly program on Sundays from 3 to 3:30. They also did a weekly radio show. And then they were picked up by the ABC network and returned back to that 15 million that was the kerfuffle. They were so successful that Orson Welles, John Steinbeck, Tulul Bankhead, Ben Gower, Milton Caniff, and Adlai Stevenson were many of their adult fans. So it kind of reminds me of they had a file in Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse, So they was, but they had their following. They did win a Peabody Award in 1949, and they won 2 Emmy Awards in 1954 and in 1971 for outstanding children's programming. Now, the next show that I'm going to talk about, which I did not know until I did this one, a little before my time, which is pick 23 and 24. It's a picture of a girl that looks like a blue fairy. It was called The Blue Fairy. Very simple. It starred Bridget Balesen. It was in 1958. They also won a they won a, oh, let's see, looks, they were broadcasted by the WGN. They won a Peabody Award too, but they were very local, which was surprising because Peabody was usually more like Cook Friendly and went nationwide. This was very local, but they won. And the producer of the show had spotted Brazen playing hopscotch outside Brazen's Chicago home and told her mother that you're the little girl. This kind of sounds creepy. That you're the little girl just right from my TV series. It's kind of like, when you want to get in my van, kind of stuff. Yeah, I got some candy. Yes, I'll make you a movie star. I'll make you a model. But so this girl, Bridget, was the blue fairy, and she lived in the blue forest. She dressed in a blue gown. She had a diamond tiara. It was one of the first they colorized this, so I think they really want to emphasize the blue. She also clasped a silver wand. At the beginning of each show, she was suspended by wires to look like she was flying. An elfin rings across the stage, and she would say, "I'm the blue fairy. I'll grant you a wish to make your dreams come true." And then she would sit on an oversized mushroom, and she'd be visited by creatures. Oh my God, this sounds like this sounds like a trip somewhere. She would be visited by creatures such as Tugnacious R. Jones, Myrtle Flower, and an old nasal voice wizard, which were puppets designed by George Nell and writer Don Kane. They also introduced stories by Rufus Rose marionettes. And they also engaged in projects like construction of a popcorn machine. They would not stop would not stop popping, and a sewing machine. So I guess they do arts and crafts. Like I said, she won a Peabody Award in 1958. And even though this is only like a local Chicago show, the show also inspired Ernie Kovacs into doing one of his notorious comedy sketches where Kovacs, wearing a mustache, chewing a cigar, dressed in a blue gown and a blonde wig and holding a silver wand, flew across the stage, slammed headfirst into the wall on the opposite side, and then left dangling to mock the likenesses. So I guess it was kind of one of those, like, you had to be there kind of to know the jokes to get it. So, but I didn't know about that show at all, so it doesn't look like it was on very long. Then there was, of course, the beloved Romper Room, if you guys remember. So Romper Room, on like the Bosa Circus, was 5 decades. It was on 50 years. They gave millions of young children their first exposure to preschool kindergarten environment. The show featured a hostess who would leave a group of 7 to 8 children in various educational and play activities. The children were about 4 to 5 years old. They rotated every couple of months. It ran from 1953 to 1994. I didn't know it went that long. I just remembered. But it was originally filmed in Baltimore. Then it later moved to Chicago. Then returned to Baltimore. But the show was franchised and syndicated, kind of like the Bozo Show. Well, the Bozo Show was a little different, but anyways, it went all to different markets. So there was like a romper room in every different city. So if you watch a show when you were little, chances are you saw a different hostess and different kids. You know, if you lived in Philadelphia or if you lived in Chicago, it was kind of different. But the one in Chicago began in 1955. And just like real schoolrooms in those days, each show would begin with the hostess leading the kids in the Pledge of Allegiance. And then the hostess would read books to the kids, teach them the alphabet, direct them in playing games, doing exercise. Consistent with the schoolroom ethos or atmosphere, many of the Romper Room's hostesses were former kindergarten teachers, and they know how to deal with young children. So I guess that you have to do that. And they were always addressed by Miss Nancy or Miss Susie or whatever their first name was. That's what they were always called. Miss Rosemary. The show also featured a character called Doobie. A recurring character is a bumblebee costume whose role was to show, in the show, was to teach children's manners. Like, he would always start the sentence like, do be polite to your parents, and things like that. So it was educational. Now, one of the things I remember at the end of the show was the hostess would come and hold a magic mirror that was empty with no thing, and she would hold her face, and she would say to all the viewers in television land, she would recite the rhyme, romper, romper, stopper, boo, tell me, do, magic mirror, tell me today, have all my friends had fun to play? And then she would start naming children that she could see at home. I see Scotty and Kimberly and Julie and Jimberly and Kelly. And parents would mail in, so they would mention their names. And it was quite a thrill if they got to mention your name. And chances are good you would hear it at least at some point, but no, you didn't. Not everybody heard it, because I remember sending my name and never once heard, I see you, Giovina. Yes, Giovina. So I never heard that. So I tried, but I remember sitting there waiting, and she would sit there, and yes, that was the big thing. No, I don't think they got to everybody. They would have said, or they would have said Giovanna or Glovana or whatever they say for my name. Then the next children's show that was a favorite of mine, Garfield Goose and Friends. So you remember that, and that was a television show produced by WGN from 1955 to 1976. The show was also known, so it was called Garfield Goose and Friend. Actually, it was Fraser Thomas, Garfield Goose and Friend from 1952 to 55. And then it was at the time, it was the longest running puppet show until Sesame Street broke that record. Of course, the show hosted Fraser Thomas. He did all the talking. The show centered around a clacking goose puppet named Garfield Goose, who considered himself the king of the United States. There was many other puppet characters such as Romberg Rabbit, Macintosh Mouse, Chris Goose, which was Garfield's nephew. He was born on Christmas, so he was short for Christmas goose, which is usually cooked, but I guess this guy wasn't cooked. There was a sleepy bloodhound called Beauregard Burnside III, whose name happened to be a mix of two American Civil War generals. The show used little screen theater, which a camera would zoom on before cartoons. So they would show Total Television, Funny Company, Clutch Cargo. You remember that? It was a cartoon, but they had a real person's mouth, and it would be off moving to the side. It was creepy. The Pink Panther. They had a lot of stuff beforehand on Barbera. Had his own show. Yes. Jay Ward, Space Angel, Mighty Hercules. Now, Thomas created Garfield Goose. He originally hosted it in Cincinnati. And then he was an Indiana native, and he worked in Cincinnati local radio before World War II. He got the idea for Garfield Goose when he saw Catholic nuns with sock puppets in the form of a goose, in which they invited children to feed the goose with donations to charity. So they were asking for money, feed the goose. And so he wanted to do something special, and that's where he created his TV show. And so he moved to Chicago in 1951. He started with the CBS affiliate and then Channel 4. He originally started on Petticoat Party, which was a variety show that was hosted by Thomas. And then 1952, he debuted his show. Now, at the time the show began, I always wondered why the puppets didn't talk. So this is an interesting tidbit. At the time the show began, the American Federation of Radio Artists and Union began to recognize those working in television performers to become members of the union and to receive union scale wages for their work, which is above the current scale they were currently paying the sailors in many cases. So those who appeared on camera or had voice roles, because originally, when he originally showed this in Cincinnati and CBS, Channel 2, the goose talked. The Garfield Goose talked. But when they started the union and they had to pay union wages, the guy that did the puppet that they had to pay union scale, they didn't want to pay him that much money, so the goose no longer talked. They stopped that. And so they used it and they couldn't afford it. It wasn't Fraser Thomas saying you can't, they just didn't have enough money for the show, and they needed to pay the star, Fraser Thomas. And so they decided that Fraser Thomas was going to act as the translator for the goose. But the guy that created this was named by Bruce Newton. And he had to stay off camera, and he could not speak. And Newton had Garfield Goose communicate with Thomas through an off-screen typewriter. But Newton was soon replaced by Roy Brown, and then Roy Brown later created the puppet characters, because basically Brazil was like, I can't afford to work here anymore, so I quit. But he got in a little trouble because he said he created the puppet and he took the characters, Garfield Goose and them, on like around the country for live stage performances, and got in a little trouble because they said that was their property. He said no, he created it, so it created a little bit of tension. But the puppet would talk with claps, and clicks. You know, he did a lot of this, you know, different things to talk, and then Fraser would translate. But basically, it was entertaining and subtly educational. They would have guests from the Museum of Science and Industry, Lincoln Park Zoo. They and the show would have viewers with their hobby projects. And
I was on it one day.
oh, see if you get somebody that was on it. Okay,
You're a star.
you're a star. Yes, there you go.
1973.
So the show remained on WGN Channel 9, which bought the rights in 1955, and it was on over 2 decades. It ran in the late afternoon after children would come home from school. And then in 1957, Pat Weaver, who created the Today and Tonight Show on NBC, had the hopes of starting a 4th network, and they wanted to syndicate some of the shows. So, but unfortunately, during the 70s, when they thought of doing some of this, they lost viewership, and competition moved and they moved the show to weekday mornings. And the show's long run ended in September 10th, 1976. So as often happened with these shows that were filmed live, the children's show was filmed live. A lot of stuff was filmed live in the 50s and 60s. Garfield Goose was aired live throughout its history, and so WGN did not keep many tapes of local production, and so and since reels to videotape were costly, a lot of stuff was recycled, and they didn't foresee how valuable these recordings would be. So there's only 4 complete episodes that were preserved. Wow. March 14th to 15th from 1974, September 9th and 10th from 1976, and the latter 2 being the final 2 shows of the series. So unless somebody like videotaped it there, but so there's not a lot to fortunately see there, but they just didn't think of that far ahead. That brings me to my next show that I liked, Ray Rayner and Friends. So that guy was all over the place. I always thought he was drunk on that show. And that's just kind of how he operated. But it started in 1962. So originally, Ray Rayner did a lot for WGN. He began hosting his own long-run Ray Rayner Friends. He had Breakfast with Bugs Bunny. He did like Afternoons with Dick Tracy. He was also the clown Ali D. Oliver. I forget this. I'd have to go look him in. But he was on Bozo's show. So he was, they said in the beginning, he was at WGN from like morning to night. He would do traffic on the show, and he was doing Dick Tracy, and he was doing so he was doing a lot. He was there a lot. So, but his show featured old cartoons, and it was renamed so it was first, I think, just called Ray Rayner, and then they called it Ray Rayner and Friends in 1964. They did a lot of Warner Brothers cartoons and characters, and they showed those cartoons full with all the gory violence and stuff that they had back then. When the series kept going, the TV show, later they cut out and edited a lot, but at the beginning they showed it in full glory. So he did arts and crafts, which ended up basically a hot gluey mess a lot of times because he didn't know what he was doing. He had animals such as Chelveston the duck, who was named after RAF Chelveston, where Rayner was stationed during World War II. Chelveston occasionally bit. If you remember, he used to nip at his heels all the time. And so he told a story where I read that they got this duck, and there was actually 4 ducks over the period of the show, probably more than 4 ducks, but they would get the show from the Animal Kingdom, and they bring it in overnight so that they'd be ready in the morning, and the people that worked overnight were feeding this duck constantly. So then he would try to feed in the morning some lettuce and stuff. The duck was like, I'm full. And so, but he would chase after Ray Rayner, and she was like, try to bite his heels. So he started putting padding and stuff in his heels so they wouldn't bite him. Well, then the set designers and the costume designers started putting food in his because he wore overalls. So that the duck would keep biting him because it was a good bit. So the duck would keep chasing. So then, but it was funny. It was just, I didn't realize that the duck came from Animal Kingdom, and they kept it there overnight, and all these little tidbits. But yeah, well, we got to get to the Cuddly Duddly. So during these segments, Chevelson walked around the set. He ate or bathed, because he used to bathe them a lot. Then he would play like top 40 songs. He'd say, oh, it's 8:10 on the hour or whatever. And then he had a talking dog puppet, which was Cuddly Duddly. And there's a picture 29 and 30. You'll see a picture of him with Cuddly Duddly and Chevelson the duck. We had 2 Cuddly Duddly stuffed animals. I cannot find them. We did not save them. There's a picture at the end. You'll see my sister with it. I had me with it because I love my Cuddly Duddly. And then Cuddly Duddly was created and voiced by Roy Brown, which, if you guys know Bozo Circus history, was Cookie the Cook. And it would highlight viewer mail, which included many hand-drawn pictures submitted by children. This segment was often humorous because it was a chance for Ray Rayner and Brown to interact they did a lot of ad libs, and they would do a lot of double entendres and stuff that went over the kids' heads, but maybe mom was watching and said, oh, I get that, So he always wore a jumpsuit, if you remember, and it was covered pieces of paper. And the pieces of paper would say, like, cartoon, commercial. It was kind of like, because he probably had forgetfulness, is like, okay, and I got to do the commercial next, and does this here. And he would look. It was before they had, and he would pin it. So this is before sticky Post-it notes. He'd pin it to his jumpsuit. So, and then he would also simulcast traffic reports from sister station WGN over stock footage, and then Safety Town. If it was baseball season, he showed and narrated highlights of the Cubs and White Sox games from the previous day, and he had a custom sewn baseball cap that had Cubs on one side, Sox on the other, and whoever was playing that day whoever score he was telling, he'd flip the hat. So he'd spun it around. So a lot of this stuff, a lot of the artifacts from a lot of these kids shows is at the Chicago Broadcast Museum, which is currently moving locations. Unfortunately, I can't go, but it was there. They started in 2000. This whole thing about they had a lot of stuff in Bozo Circus. They had Ray Rayner, a lot of this, a lot of history. So hopefully they lost the lease, or the owner of the building sold, and so they have to move to a new. They hope in 2025 to reopen. So hopefully when they do, I would say definitely check it out to see all this stuff. But they had, next thing he had was the arts and crafts segment, which was always, they had a finished prepared version in advance, and then they would do behind the scenes, and often the producer, Dick Flanders, would display the audience like the finished product, and then Ray Raymer tried to do it, and his stuff never looked, it was always half fall apart. It was, he was not arts and crafty. So, he contended that his failure at crafts made the show successful to show the young viewers, like, look, I tried it, didn't work out. You could try it at home. It might not look pretty, but, go ahead and do it. And then every Christmas, he had an advent calendar, and he revealed a date each day until Christmas. He did another bit where he lip sync to older novelty songs such as Hello Mother, Hello Father. And then he also sang himself. He did some serious songs. They had a trip called Ark in the Park, where they taped segment with the trip to Lincoln Park Zoo. They had the then director at that time, Dr. Lester Fisher. They did that song, and you could go find it on YouTube, The Unicorn by the Irish Rovers. And He also did a lot of how and why segments with J. Bruce Mitchell from the Chicago Museum of Science and History. And then along with Boza's Circus, there was a video game added to Ray Ray's show that viewers could play by phone called, that was towards the end of the show, called TV Pow. So, and I did not know this, but in 1968, Rayner also appeared in television commercials for McDonald's as a Ronald McDonald. So, so he was one of the many Ronald McDonalds. So, then on my next show that I loved, and this one, not everybody's but no, but BJ and the Dragon, if you guys remember that. So if you look at pics like number 31 and 32, so it was created by a gentleman named Jackson. He had a program called Clown Alley on Channel 2, which they got critically praised but did poor ratings. And then he went to WFLD, which is now Channel 32, Fox, is independent station, and he got a time slot there, unfortunately against Garfield, Goose, and Friends, and doing this Clown Alley. And he came up with this show based on that, and his full name was Bill Jackson. He later retitled it to BJ and the Dirty Dragon, and then it just came BJ and the Dragon. Now, Jackson appeared as himself, and then he had the most popular character, the Dirty Dragon. He was a gruff creature who snorted smoke and supposedly was based on a co-worker of his in Indianapolis. So, and Jackson was the mayor of a fictional cartoon town, and the puppets were all residents. Dirty Dragon was the postmaster, and I remember this. He ended up eating most of the mail. And then he had this character called the Blob, and this used to I liked him, but then it gave me nightmares because the Blob, he would was called the Town Monument, and it was basically a clay molding, and he would make it into whatever he wanted to be. But the Blob spoke in a strange, distorted voice, and it was like a kid, you'd have nightmares of it, but looking back at it, and they would make it, he would decide the Blob was going to be happy, he'd make a happy face. If the Blob was going to be sad, whatever it was. But only Jackson can interpret it, what the Blob said. And whatever the Blob asked him to manipulate, like, I'm mad now, make me mad, it's supposed to be kind of educational too. This show is credited with helping spur the UHF market, which was like your Channel 26 and your Channel 32. But unfortunately, they had to compete with Channel 9. So fortunately for Jackson, this show kept getting moved around, and he had a small budget. But he did a lot with his small budget. He every time he had moved a time slot, he kind of did an overhaul of his show. So what he did is he had a live version of the show. So for a while when he overhauled, and I didn't get a picture of it, but this is the one that gave me the most nightmares. So he had these puppets, and they were small size. They decided to go, he had a traveling show, and he had life size of like the dragon and the puppet. And when you see a puppet life size, 5'6", right? It was like as a kid, you're like, oh my God, I used to have nightmares about it, but it was still funny. So, but, and because he wanted to follow along this in-person theater setting, but it eventually returned back to its original regular-sized puppet show. But he did go around and tour the show to live audiences way before the Wiggles and all them did that. But the show lasted from 1973 until aired on 1973 till 1974. And he, at that time, commuted between Chicago and New York because he was taking the show. It was a live touring show. And then he always did a couple Christmas shows. So he did one holiday show called A Gift for Granny. And then he did another one in 1974. But like I said, he really had a lot of shoestring. But when the show got canceled, he revamped it. And he did another show called The Giggle Snort Hotel, which took a lot of the characters. That one people probably remember because that had more of that was on WLS. And that was a Sunday morning series. And it took, Jackson was, he did a little more education with this one. He was a hotel desk clerk, BJ and the rest of the puppet cast were either guests or employees of the hotel. They had a character that owned the hotel, Captain Giggle Snort, that giggled a lot, that probably was drunk a lot. I don't know. But he snorted a lot. But that ran for 78 half-hour episodes. And then his final series in Chicago was another WLS production called Firehouse Follies. And that only ran for 13 episodes, so that didn't go as well. But in 1995, Jackson donated the show puppets to the Museum of Broadcast Communication. So like I said, hopefully when they reopen that museum, you can visit and see a lot of that. Now to the final and my favorite, Mr. Bozo Circus or the Bozo Show. So you can look up pick 33, 34, 35. So Bozo, the character of Bozo, was created by Livingston, who produced a children's storytelling record album and illustrative read-along book set, the first of its kind, titled Bozo and the Circus for Capitol Records in 1946. They had a famous clown at the time, Colvig. He portrayed the character in these read-along records. So, and then you looked at a lot of Capitol records at the time. They were supposed to be children approved. And they would say, Bozo approved, and a picture of Bozo would be in there. Bozo approves it. And then Campbell and Livingston set up royalty arrangements, and they kind of like franchised out the Bozos, this character. They franchised him out. And so the first show to have Bozo was KTTV in Los Angeles, and that was called Bozo Circus, and that was featuring Colvig as the Bozo with the blue and red costume over the red hair. He had that red wig custom designed, and that would be on Fridays at 7:30 p.m. In 1957, Larry Harmon, one of the several actors hired by Livingston at Capitol Records to portray Bozo for a promotional appearance, formed a business partnership and bought the licensing rights, excluding the record readers, of the character for 1 year after Livingston left Capitol. Harmon renamed the character Bozo, the world's most famous clown, and modified the voice, laugh, and costume. He then worked with a wig stylist to get the wingtip, the famous, the Flying Nun wingtip red hair. But he worked with the wig designer. He got a bright orange to look like hair that had previously appeared on the comic books. He started his own animation studio and distributed a series of cartoons. With Harmon, he did the voice of Bozo at that time, to television stations, along with the rights to hire his own Bozo hosts. So Bozo would be like the host, they'd show cartoons, and that's kind of how it started. The first one being in Los Angeles was Vance Colvig Jr., which was the son of the original Pinto Colvig, the father. Now, unlike many shows on television, Bozo the Clown was mostly a franchise as opposed to being syndicated. So that means local stations could put their own local production or spin on Bozo, and then use the moderately successful children programming, with this character. The most successful was Chicago. And we can thank Bob Bell, because he, in the beginning, if you remember, he didn't have the blue costume, he had a red costume. So, and then when, in 1978, when WGN became a superstation and went satellite, we got exposure. We had the longest run in Bozo. From 1961 to 2001 was 40 years. A lot of the other ones died way before that. And they had a waiting list. They had a waiting list for student tickets. In the beginning, there were stories of them busing kids over because they couldn't fill it, but they had a waiting list, and it got up to about 10 years. Now, there's a story in my family that my mother sent in when I was little for Bozo tickets, and supposedly came about 10 years later. And at that time, I decided I was too cool for school and couldn't go see Bozo. And I did not go to see Bozo. I'm kicking myself in the... I should have went, but I decided at 10 years... Now, so this is my mother telling me that I decided... I don't remember this, so I'm thinking my mother never got those Bozo tickets and just told me that. But because I'm thinking I would have kicked myself, but That's supposedly the thing. So, wait, hold on one second. Sorry. So it was like I said, it was the Chicago Bozo franchise was the most popular, successful. They did a lot. If you ever watch a show, if you watch it back now as an adult, they had a lot of adult humor, a lot of innuendos, a lot of inside jokes, a lot of improv. When they originally, the ringmaster was Ned Locke, and he used to be on other shows at WGN. And then when he retired, they brought Fraser Thomas of Garfield, Goose and Friends, and Fraser Thomas used to do that Sunday night show with the Family Classics. Thank you. He was used to watching the script, and they were all improv, and he could not handle it. And like one time, they pelted him with a bunch of pies in the face, and he stood there frozen because he was not ready for them. But they were a lot of improv, fast moving. So and another little side note, I met Bob Bell. My dad worked in construction. He worked in the winters. Back then, you didn't work all your construction in the winters. He worked at bars and used to take kids in the bars. And he, one time, I was sitting at the bar drinking a kitty cocktail, and he said, "This is Bozo." And I said, "No, that's not Bozo." He said, "Yes, it is." He said, "It's Bozo," but he didn't have the makeup on, he didn't have the costume. I didn't figure, and I was like 8 or 9. But then he did the laugh and the thing. I'm like, "Oh my God, it's Bozo!" And I cried because they didn't have the makeup on and everything. But and Bozo was drinking at the bar and smoking a cigarette. so I know the truth. So. But they were one of the few Bozo shows. They kind of invented the grand prize game. That wasn't on all the other Buzzer. It was created by Sandberg, and it was where a boy and girl selected from the studio audience with the magic arrows from the Bozo pewter, a random number generator. And remember, sometimes we'd land on a mom. You can't play. You're a mom. And then the player attempted to toss the pink balls into 6-number buckets in sequence, and each set farther away than the one before it, and they won a prize increasing in value after the one hit. And then they had, in the beginning, they used to have a cash bonus that was $1 a day, and then it would keep increasing if somebody didn't get to bucket 6 and they got up. And then it was a bicycle in later years. And if you missed the first bucket, they were allowed to keep trying until they won a prize. And then they also had a studio audience member play from home. He had a postcard of yours, and they won whatever the kid was winning. They always did one boy, one girl. For many years, so then it was the grand prize game became so popular that Larry Harmon, the original inventor of Bozo, purchased the rights to the Bozo. Who purchased the rights to Bozo, adapted the Bozo game to other. He kind of franchised it out to other shows. Then they had the Bozo at the grand prize game for at home. I remember many a birthday party playing the grand prize main. Yes, and so so the show started in 1961. By 1963, the show had welcomed its 100th visitor and reached the 250 mark by 1966. And as I said, the show was so popular locally that, now this is a funny story, I didn't know this one. I know about people waiting, but they said 7 hours after the Chicago blizzard in 1976 began, 1967 began, there was 193 people standing in line waiting for their Bozo show tickets. That's the dedicated people. But that was one of the few times that they canceled the Bozo show, and they ran an older show instead. But that's, people went out in that 67 blizzard because they had to go to their Bozo show. When I was a kid, I remember they had hour-long live show weekdays at noon, and we used to go home for lunch. So you watch Bozo, but you couldn't finish watching Bozo because you had to get back to school. But you tried, and they didn't have videotapes and stuff back then. And then in 1978, when WGN became the Superstation, they went to weekday mornings as the Bozo show. Then there was in 1994 they went to a tape delay, and it was no longer live, and they went to Sunday mornings as the Bozo Super Sunday Show, and it became part of the educational informational. In 1997, the FCC had a role that he had so much educational informational shows on, and then the final show was a primetime special in 2001 Bozo, 40 Years of Fun. And it was taped June 12th, 2001. It aired July 14th, 2001. And then they showed reruns of the Super Sunday show until August of 2001. Now, the cast members included Bob Bell as Bozo. He was from 1960 to 1984. And then Bell's voice was later a pattern for Krusty the Clown. Sounds like Bozo, so they used him. He was the gold standard. Ned Locke was the original ringmaster from 1961 to 76. Don Sandberg as Sandy the Tramp. He was 61 to 69. Ray Rayner as Oliver O'Oliver from 61 to 71. Roy Brown as Cookie the Cook from 68 to 94. Marshall Brodeen as Wizzo, the Wizard from 68 to 94. If you remember, he used to do the Yes, he was, and he used to do doody 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 doo. And if you remember the commercials of Marshall Brodeen's trick, he had a magic kit that you could send home for the kids could do magic because he was a magician. So yeah, he was the and then Fraser Thomas became the circus manager from 1976 to 85. Joey DiAria as Bozo from 84 to 2001. He replaced Bob Bell. He had big shoes to fill. He had a much higher pitched voice than Bob Bell had, he was, Bozo's like, I can't do it. But they had, I don't remember this character, Andy Mitrin as Professor Annie from 87 to 2001. By that time, I was busy drinking in the bars and stuff. It was Robin Urich as Rusty the Handyman. And then they had in 2005, they had a television retrospective titled Bozo, Gar, and Ray WGN TV Classics. And that was a primetime special, premiered as #1 in the Chicago market. Bozo continues to appear in parades and festivals as kind of as needed. And probably the biggest change to occur was, like I said, in 1984 when Bob Bell retired. They did a big show for him. But in 2001, the station management controversially ended production, citing increased competition from new cable channels like Nickelodeon and the Disney Channel, and they just couldn't compete. So the final taping was a 90-minute primetime special called 40 Years of Fun. And they had Billy Corgan sang on the show. I guess he was and Bozo wore a black suit and so if you look at pic number 37, you'll see that. And they had Bob Bell was already deceased by that time, but they had Jody Ario, a bunch of people came back, pretty much anybody that was still alive at that time. And many of the costumes and props are on display of the Museum of Broadcast Communications. And let's see, it looks like Bozo returned to Chicago Parade in a float in 2008. It was for the 60th anniversary. And unfortunately, the few episodes from the first 2 decades survived, although some were recorded to videotape and delayed broadcast. The tapes were reused, a lot like your old videotapes, you record over it. In 2012, a vintage tape was located by Walter Brown Media Archives and Peabody Awards. And so WGN reacquired the tape, and they put together a new special called Bozo Circus, The Lost Tape, which aired 2012. And in 2018, Don Sandberg, Bozo Circus, he was a producer, besides being the Sandy the Tramp, and a writer, was the last surviving original cast member. He died at the age of 87. And then 4 months later, WGN paid tribute to Sandberg on the wrestling cast for a 2-hour special called Bozo Circus, the 1960s. So, but if you look at the last few pictures, there's a picture of there's a picture of my sister with Cuddly Doug. There's a picture of me and my sister on the bed with one of these Bozo dolls. And then there's another picture with Bozo on the bed. My mother had our bedroom looked like a circus. It had red and white stripes, and we had a lot of clown themes. So it was a lot of people are afraid of clowns. I'm not afraid of clowns. I love clowns. So some other things scare me, but not clowns. So, but that ends my talk. I hope I didn't drag you on too much. But and now we've got any questions. So I don't know if I can answer, but I will try. Go ahead.
I have a question and then a comment. So these very original
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
These very original, very short films, like you pictured the one of the African American couple kissing, and you said, it was 20 seconds long. Where did people watch these original ones that were so quick?
Oh, so she wants to know where they watched some of the original films. They were from like 1898, 1896 for short films, 20 second. They did those kinetoscopes first originally. They had Nickelodeons, and they would watch movie, and then eventually it became under the big. But first in the beginning it was Nickelodeons and stuff.
Where were those machines?
There was a lot in Chicago. We had a lot in Chicago. We had a lot of theaters. They're not there. They're not around anymore.
Were they just like in hotels? Or
No, they were just Nickelodeon. That was just places of entertainment. Yeah, yeah. Like a penny arcade. A lot came to traveling circuses or traveling carnivals. They would show that way too. People would stand in line because that was the beginning of entertainment. So, yeah, we had a lot.
So now when I was a kid and in my neighborhood, in my house, it was like a major slam if an older sibling or friend said, "Oh, you still watch Romper Room."
Well, that was supposed to be, that was definitely,
Like the slam.
yeah, well, that was supposed to be like kindergarten or preschool stuff. That was,
Okay. You really didn't. I mean, it got to an age where Romper Room was not.
I watched it when I was little. I don't remember when I got bigger. I definitely watched Ray Rayner for a while in the morning, even as I got older, but he was always a hot mess. I always thought in my mind he was drunk, even though I did think that's just how he ad-libbed a lot. He was good on improvisation, so, and there's a lot of jokes he said that flew over.
Just a reminder,
So,
people watching
okay.
the live
Oh, go ahead.
try to keep it to questions for now, and then I'll end it and we can chat, okay?
Okay, go ahead. You got a question?
Yeah, the Bob Bell person, was he related to Lee Philip Bell, who then created Young and the Restless, who was also...
No. I didn't get to the soap opera, but no, he's not related. Yeah, yeah. No, he's not related. So, yeah. Oh, she asked about if Bob Bell was related to, what was her name again? Lee Philip Bell, that wrote a lot of the soap operas like Young and the Restless, but they're not related. So, okay. Now, any other questions?
Questions?
Okay, go ahead.
So I actually last year went through a run of watching movies by the director Andrew Davis, who's a Chicagoan, and you mentioned the gap that there weren't many films until the late 70s, and I found out that actually in Davis's first film, Stony Island, which was released in 1978, that Mayor Daley, the first Mayor Daley, did not allow film permits for over a decade in the 70s, and that film was filmed entirely without permits and actually caught footage of his funeral. And it was after that then that like film permits started, being allowed, and that was, you get like Michael Mann's Thief and more films throughout the 80s after that.
Oh, okay. So he was asking about, because he said in the 70s, the original Mayor Daley didn't allow permits, and that probably is true. I didn't look that up, but that sounds like the original Mayor Daley, because he probably didn't want to show Chicago as gritty and dirty as it was at that time, and we didn't clean up a lot of stuff. So I could see that, because there was stuff being filmed here, but not very much, and it wasn't until they started giving those tax credits. And after he passed away, that we had the resurgence and the boom. So, any other questions or any online questions?
No internet questions. Any other questions in the room? All right.
Okay,
good
then.
job,
So thank you. Bye bye. I probably went.